The 911 dispatcher heard the words but couldn't process them. A 52-year-old woman's voice, steady as granite despite the impossible claim crackling through the phone lines at 6:47 that August morning. "There's an 18-foot python crushing my bull calf, and if you don't send help in the next 10 minutes, we're all going to die out here." The coffee cup slipped from dispatcher Jenny Morrison's fingers, shattering across the linoleum floor of the Polk County Emergency Center. This wasn't a prank call. The woman's voice carried the weight of absolute truth, the kind of bone-deep certainty that comes from staring death in the face. In the background, Jenny could hear sounds that would haunt her dreams: the desperate, heart-wrenching bellow of a trapped animal, the thunderous pawing of hooves against earth, and something else, a low, prehistoric hissing that made her skin crawl. Beth Harrison stood in her pasture, cordless phone pressed against her ear with one hand, crowbar gripped in the other, watching a monster from her nightmares coil tighter around the calf she'd raised like her own son. "Ma'am, stay on the line," Jenny whispered, already knowing that some mornings change everything, and this was one of them. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 18 months before that desperate phone call, Beth Margaret Harrison had been a different woman, one who still set 2 coffee cups on the kitchen counter each morning out of habit, who talked to empty rooms as if Robert were still there to answer back. The Rolling Hills Ranch stretched across 300 acres of East Texas hill country, home to 43 head of magnificent Brahman cattle with their distinctive humped backs and heat-tolerant constitution that made them perfect for the brutal Texas summers. At 52, Beth carried herself with the posture of someone who'd spent decades balancing bedpans and managing life-or-death decisions as an ICU nurse, though she'd given up that career 28 years ago when she married Robert Harrison and traded her stethoscope for a ranch hand's gloves. She'd been 3 credits shy of veterinary school when love intervened, a sacrifice she'd convinced herself was worth making every day since, until Robert's massive heart attack stole that certainty along with everything else. The ranch had been their shared dream, built from nothing but determination and borrowed money, specializing in breeding Brahman cattle whose muscled frames and gentle temperaments made them prized throughout the Southwest. Robert had possessed an almost mystical connection with the animals, able to calm a spooked bull with nothing but his voice and steady hands. Beth had been the practical one, managing the books, administering medications, and handling the business side while Robert worked his magic with their 4-legged family. Now, 18 months after burying her husband of 26 years, Beth moved through her daily routines like a woman underwater. The diabetes diagnosis had come 6 months after the funeral, stress-induced, the doctor said, and she'd been managing it with pills and denial, washing down her evening medication with whatever wine was on sale at the local grocery store. Her daughter Emily called it self-medicating during their increasingly rare and increasingly hostile phone conversations from Dallas, where the 28-year-old corporate lawyer had built a life that seemed designed to be as different from her rural upbringing as possible. The distance between mother and daughter had grown wider than the 200 miles of highway that separated their worlds. Emily blamed the ranch for stealing her childhood, claiming that her parents had always loved their cattle more than their only child. Beth blamed herself for not fighting harder to bridge the gap, for not understanding how a girl could feel invisible in a house full of love, even if that love was often directed towards sick calves and injured horses that needed immediate attention. Among all the cattle on Rolling Hills Ranch, 2 held special places in Beth's heart. Athena was a 1,200-pound Brahman cow with intelligent dark eyes and an unusually protective nature, while Apollo, a 6-month-old bull calf with a striking coat of black and reddish-brown, had become Beth's constant companion since arriving at the ranch under mysterious circumstances that Robert had taken to his grave. What Beth didn't know, as she struggled through those lonely months of widowhood, was that her carefully controlled world was about to collide with forces beyond her imagination. The storm hit East Texas like God's own fury at 2:47 a.m. on August 15th, transforming what should have been a peaceful summer night into a symphony of destruction. Beth Harrison jerked awake to the sound of her century-old farmhouse groaning under winds that howled like banshees across the rolling hills. Lightning split the sky in jagged white scars, illuminating her bedroom in stroboscopic flashes that made shadows dance like demons on the walls. She'd gone to bed earlier than usual, nursing her third glass of cheap Merlot and the familiar ache that always intensified as Robert's birthday approached. August 20th would mark what should have been his 55th year, and Beth had learned that grief was a creature with its own schedule, arriving uninvited to tear open wounds she thought had healed. The wine helped blur the edges of loneliness, made the empty house feel less cavernous, though she knew Emily would disapprove if she knew about her mother's evening ritual. The storm's violence was unprecedented for the region. Category 2 thunderstorms were rare this far inland, but climate change had been throwing curveballs at Texas ranchers for years. Rain hammered the tin roof like machine gun fire, and Beth pulled a pillow over her head, willing herself back to sleep. She'd weathered dozens of storms on this ranch, and morning always brought nothing more than downed branches and power outages. At 3:47 a.m., the earth itself seemed to scream. The sound that woke Beth wasn't thunder. It was the deep, groaning death cry of something ancient giving up its hold on life. Through her bedroom window, a lightning flash revealed her worst fear realized. The massive mesquite tree that had stood sentinel at the edge of the main pasture for over 60 years was falling, its root system finally surrendering to the saturated soil and relentless wind. Beth threw on her boots and rain slicker, grabbing the heavy-duty flashlight Robert had always kept by the back door. The storm was already beginning to weaken, but the damage was done. As she slogged through ankle-deep mud toward the pasture, her light revealed the full scope of the disaster. The mesquite, easily 60 feet tall and 3 feet in diameter at its base, lay across the pasture like a fallen giant, its massive trunk creating an impenetrable barrier that would take weeks to clear. But it was the sound that made her blood freeze, a weak, pitiful crying that rose above the dying wind like a child calling for help. "No, no, no," Beth whispered, breaking into a run despite the treacherous footing. Her flashlight beam danced wildly as she approached the fallen tree, and what she found there nearly brought her to her knees. Apollo was trapped beneath the enormous trunk, his powerful hind legs pinned under several tons of wood. The 6-month-old Brahman bull calf that had followed her around the ranch like an oversized puppy was lying on his side, his beautiful black and reddish-brown coat matted with mud and rain. His large, intelligent eyes found hers in the flashlight beam, and Beth saw something there that shattered her heart. Not just pain and confusion, but trust. Even in his agony, Apollo was looking to her for salvation. "Easy, baby," she called softly, approaching with the careful movements Robert had taught her around injured animals. "I'm here, Mama's here, and we're going to get you out of there." But even as she spoke the words, Beth felt despair washing over her like a cold tide. The tree had to weigh several tons, far more than she could move even with mechanical assistance. Her nearest neighbor, Charlie Henderson, lived 2 miles away, and by the time she could reach him and return with help, Apollo's labored breathing might have stopped forever. She knelt beside the trapped calf, running her hands over his exposed body, checking for injuries with the clinical skill that never quite left a nurse's hands. His pulse was rapid but strong, and while she could see swelling around his hindquarters where the tree had pinned him, there were no obvious signs of massive internal bleeding. Yet. The weight crushing down on him was making it difficult for his lungs to expand properly, and Beth knew that time was not on their side. That's when she heard Athena. The sound that emerged from the main pasture was unlike anything Beth had ever heard from a cow, a deep, primal bellow that seemed to shake the very ground beneath her feet. Athena was calling for her adopted son, and the anguish in that sound was unmistakably maternal. The 1,200-pound Brahman cow appeared at the edge of the flashlight beam, her massive bulk moving with surprising grace as she navigated around the fallen tree's branches. "Stay back, girl," Beth called out, but she knew it was useless. Athena had heard Apollo's cries, and nothing in heaven or earth would keep a mother from reaching her child. The cow positioned herself as close to Apollo as the fallen tree would allow, her huge head stretching toward the trapped calf. She couldn't reach him, but her presence seemed to calm Apollo somewhat. His cries became less frantic, though his breathing remained labored and shallow. Beth stood up, wiping rain and tears from her face, trying to think through the problem like the pragmatic woman Robert had always said she was. She needed leverage, some way to lift or shift the massive trunk just enough to free Apollo's legs. The ranch had a hydraulic jack in the equipment barn, but it was designed for tractors, not trees, and the soft, rain-soaked ground wouldn't provide a stable base. As she played her flashlight along the length of the fallen mesquite, looking for any weakness or natural pivot point, Beth noticed something that made her skin crawl. The tree's massive root system had been torn from the earth, creating a jagged crater nearly 10 feet across. And coiled within that muddy cavity, partially hidden by exposed roots and debris, was something that had no business being in East Texas. The snake was enormous, easily 18 feet long and as thick as her torso, with diamond-patterned scales that gleamed wet in her flashlight beam. Its triangular head was the size of a dinner plate, and when it turned those prehistoric yellow eyes toward her light, Beth felt a primal terror that seemed to bypass her rational mind entirely. This was no Texas native. Beth had grown up in rural East Texas and knew every snake species that called the region home. This was a reticulated python, one of the largest snake species in the world, and it had no natural business being anywhere within 1,000 miles of her ranch. The python was moving slowly, deliberately, using the exposed root system as cover while it assessed the situation, but Beth could see its target with horrible clarity. Apollo, trapped and helpless, was exactly the kind of easy prey that would attract a hungry predator. Apollo seemed to sense the new danger. His weak cries became more urgent, and he struggled against the weight of the tree with renewed desperation. But he was too weak and too badly pinned to escape, and the python was patient in the way that only apex predators could be. Beth's mind raced through impossible calculations. She couldn't move the tree alone, couldn't fight an 18-foot python with her bare hands, and couldn't abandon Apollo to whatever fate awaited him. The nearest help was miles away, and even if she ran for her truck and drove to Charlie Henderson's place, she'd never make it back in time. That's when she remembered the crowbar. The 4-foot iron bar was in the bed of Robert's old pickup truck, parked just 50 yards away near the equipment shed. It wasn't much of a weapon against a creature that could crush a bull, but it was better than nothing. And maybe, just maybe, she could use it as a lever to shift the tree enough to give Apollo a fighting chance. As Beth splashed through the mud toward the truck, her mind filled with a desperate prayer to whatever divine force might be listening. Please, God, don't let me be too late. Don't let me lose him, too. The crowbar felt like a lifeline in Beth's trembling hands as she half ran, half stumbled back toward the fallen tree through the pre-dawn darkness. Behind her, Apollo's cries were growing weaker, and she could see the python had emerged further from the root cavity, its massive coils moving with deadly purpose toward the trapped calf. Athena was pawing the ground frantically, her maternal instincts screaming at her to protect her adopted son, but the fallen tree created an impenetrable barrier between mother and child. Beth was positioning the crowbar under the trunk, searching for a fulcrum point that might give her enough leverage to shift several tons of dead weight when her cell phone rang. The electronic chirping seemed obscenely normal against the backdrop of life and death struggle, and Beth nearly ignored it until she saw the caller ID. Emily. "Not now," she whispered, but something in her daughter's timing made her answer. "Emily, I can't talk right now." "There's an emergency. Mom, listen to me." Emily's voice cut through the phone like a blade, cold and professional in the way that always reminded Beth painfully of Robert. "I need to tell you something before you hear it somewhere else. I've been signing your name to some documents." Beth's world tilted sideways. "What are you talking about?" "The East Pasture, the 150 acres along County Road 47. I sold it, Mom. The papers are being finalized this morning at 9 o'clock. The crowbar slipped from Beth's numb fingers, clanging against the fallen tree trunk. In the distance, Apollo's breathing was becoming more labored, and the python had moved close enough that Beth could see its forked tongue flicking out to taste the air. "You did what?" "I forged your signature on the sale documents. Blackwood Development offered $200,000 for the land, and I took it. The money's already gone, Mom. I had debts, gambling debts, and they were going to hurt me if I didn't pay." 26 years of motherhood condensed into a single moment of absolute betrayal. Beth sank to her knees in the mud, phone pressed against her ear, while everything she thought she knew about her daughter crumbled like sand. "Emily, that land has been in your father's family for 3 generations. How could you—" "Because you never cared about anything except those damn animals." The words exploded from Emily's mouth like poison she'd been holding for years. "Even now, I can hear one of your precious cows in the background. I'm telling you I've lost everything, that I've betrayed you in the worst possible way, and you're still worried about some stupid bull." Beth looked at Apollo, whose trusting eyes remained fixed on her even as his breathing grew more shallow, and felt something break inside her chest. "He's not just some bull, Emily. He's—" She stopped, unable to explain what Apollo meant to her, how Robert had brought him home as a days-old orphan, and how she'd bottle-fed him through those first critical weeks, how he'd become the closest thing to a grandchild she'd ever had. "He's what, Mom? More important than your own daughter? More important than the fact that I'm probably going to jail for fraud?" The accusation hung in the air between them like a curse. In the background, Beth could hear Apollo's labored breathing getting worse, could see the python moving closer with each passing second. She was losing both her children, one to her own failures as a mother, and one to forces beyond her control. "The sale is happening at the courthouse at 9 a.m., Emily continued, her voice now flat and mechanical. "I just thought you should know before the sheriff comes to tell you that half your ranch belongs to someone else now. Maybe you can use some of that life insurance money Robert left you to buy it back." Beth's blood turned to ice. What life insurance money? The silence on the other end of the phone stretched for an eternity before Emily spoke again, her voice smaller now, confused. "The $50,000 policy, the one that was supposed to pay out 6 months ago? Mom, please tell me you got that money?" "The insurance company denied the claim," Beth whispered. "They said Robert's heart attack was related to a pre-existing condition he didn't disclose. I've been fighting them for 18 months, Emily. There is no insurance money." The sound that came from her daughter was somewhere between a sob and a scream. Oh, God, Mom, what have I done?" Before Beth could respond, she heard the rumble of a diesel engine approaching through the morning darkness. Headlights swept across the pasture as a pickup truck navigated around the storm debris, and Beth recognized the vehicle immediately, Charlie Henderson's old Ford, the one he'd been driving for the past 15 years. Relief flooded through her until she remembered that Charlie was supposed to be in Houston this week, visiting his sister. What was he doing here at dawn after the worst storm in years? The truck stopped near the fallen tree, and Charlie Henderson climbed out, carrying what looked like professional surveying equipment. At 60, he was still built like the college linebacker he'd once been, with steel gray hair and the kind of steady competence that came from decades of solving other people's problems. Beth had known Charlie for 20 years, ever since he'd moved to the neighboring ranch, and she'd always considered him one of her most trusted friends. "Beth?" Charlie's voice carried across the pasture, carefully neutral. "I saw the tree from the road." "Thought you might need help with—" He stopped mid-sentence when his flashlight beam found her kneeling in the mud beside Apollo, phone still pressed to her ear. "Charlie, thank God," Beth called out, ending the call with Emily despite her daughter's protests. "Apollo's trapped under the tree, and there's a python—" "A what?" Charlie's voice sharpened, and he moved toward them with the surveying equipment still in his hands. When his light found the massive snake coiled in the root cavity, he stopped dead. "Jesus Christ, Beth. Where did that thing come from?" Before she could answer, another vehicle approached. This one an older sedan that Beth didn't recognize. The car parked behind Charlie's truck, and a man climbed out who looked like he hadn't slept in days. He was in his mid-40s, with prematurely gray hair and the hollow-eyed look of someone carrying unbearable weight. He wore muddy jeans and a torn shirt, and he was staring at the python with an expression that mixed terror and desperate relief. "Thank God," the stranger whispered. "She's alive. Luna's alive." Beth struggled to her feet, crowbar in hand, trying to process this newest impossibility. "Who are you? And why are you calling that snake Luna?" The man stepped forward with his hands raised, the universal gesture of someone trying not to appear threatening. "My name is Marcus Webb. That python belongs to me. She escaped from my transport vehicle during the storm, and I've been tracking her all night." Charlie's surveying equipment suddenly made horrible sense. "You're not here to help me, are you, Charlie?" Her old friend's face went pale in the flashlight beam. "Beth, I can explain. You're here about the insurance investigation." The words came out flat, emotionless, as another piece of Beth's world collapsed. "You're not just my neighbor. You're working for the insurance company that denied Robert's claim." Charlie's shoulders sagged. "I'm an investigator, yes. I've been documenting irregularities in your husband's medical history, trying to understand why he had a heart attack at 53 with no family history of heart disease." "Irregularities?" Beth's voice rose dangerously. "My husband died of a massive coronary because he worked himself to death keeping this ranch running. There were no irregularities, Charlie. There was just a good man who loved his land and his animals more than he loved taking care of himself." Marcus Webb stepped forward, his voice urgent. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but that python is a reticulated python, one of the most powerful constrictors in the world. If she gets around that calf—" He trailed off, but the implication was clear. "Then help me save him," Beth demanded, raising the crowbar. "Or get out of my way." Marcus shook his head. "You don't understand. Luna isn't just any python. She's been traumatized, possibly injured in the storm. I'm the only one who can safely handle her, but I lost my veterinary license 3 years ago. If I intervene, I could face federal charges for practicing without a license." The pieces of an impossible puzzle were falling into place around Beth as Apollo's breathing became more labored and the python moved closer to its prey. Her daughter had betrayed her, selling family land to pay gambling debts. Her trusted neighbor was actually an insurance investigator building a case against her. And now a disgraced veterinarian was telling her he could save Apollo but wouldn't because of legal consequences. In the growing light of dawn, Beth Harrison looked around at the ruins of everything she'd believed about her life and made the only choice that seemed to matter anymore. She hefted the crowbar and stepped between the python and Apollo, her voice carrying across the pasture with the authority of a woman who had nothing left to lose. I don't care about your licenses or your investigations or your gambling debts, she said, never taking her eyes off the massive snake. That calf is all I have left of the man I loved, and I'll be damned if I let him die because the rest of you are too worried about covering your own asses to do what's right. The standoff that followed would be etched in Beth's memory forever. Woman, cow, and snake locked in a triangle of desperate need while the men around her wrestled with their own demons. Athena had somehow managed to force her massive head and shoulders partway under the fallen tree, close enough to Apollo that her warm breath misted across his face. The sight of mother and adopted son, separated by wood and circumstance but united by love, gave Beth the courage she needed to inch closer to the coiled python. Marcus Webb broke first. "Damn the license," he muttered, stripping off his torn shirt to reveal arms covered in old scars, some from animal bites, others that looked suspiciously self-inflicted. "Luna, easy girl, easy now." His voice transformed as he spoke to the python, taking on the soothing cadence that only came from years of working with traumatized animals. "You're scared, aren't you?" "The storm, the loud noises, everything's wrong." The python's massive head turned toward Marcus, and Beth could see recognition in those ancient eyes. This wasn't just any snake. This was an animal that knew and trusted the broken man approaching with such careful reverence. "She's not hunting," Marcus continued, his voice barely above a whisper as he moved closer to the root cavity. "She's seeking shelter. Pythons are ambush predators, but they're also creatures of routine and safety. The storm destroyed everything familiar to her." Charlie Henderson stood frozen with his surveying equipment, caught between his professional obligations and the unfolding crisis. "Marcus, if that's your real name, I'm required to report any wildlife violations I witness. This python shouldn't be in Texas at all." "My real name is Dr. Marcus Webb, formerly of the Texas A&M College of Veterinary Medicine," Marcus replied without taking his eyes off Luna. "And you're right. She shouldn't be here. She should be in a climate-controlled facility in Colorado where I've been transporting her for the past 3 days. But my truck broke down during the storm and her transport container was damaged when a tree branch came through the windshield." Beth felt her world shifting again as she processed this information. "You're a veterinarian? Then why did you lose your license?" The pain that crossed Marcus's face was so raw that Beth almost regretted asking. "Because 3 years ago I was driving home from an emergency call at 2 in the morning. I'd been drinking, not a lot, but enough. I hit a family of 4 on their way back from vacation, killed a 7-year-old boy named David Chen." The confession hung in the morning air like a curse, and Beth understood immediately why this man carried himself like someone bearing an invisible weight. She'd seen that same haunted look in her bathroom mirror for the past 18 months, the expression of someone who'd lost everything that mattered and wasn't sure they deserved to keep living. "David would have been 10 this year," Marcus continued, his voice breaking. "Same age as my son when I lost him to leukemia. I couldn't practice anymore, couldn't trust myself around families, around children. But I still knew how to care for animals, so I started volunteering at wildlife sanctuaries, transporting rescued exotics to better facilities." Luna had begun to move again, her massive coils shifting as she responded to Marcus's familiar voice. But she was still too close to Apollo, and the trapped calf's breathing was becoming increasingly labored. Beth could see that they were running out of time. Apollo needed veterinary attention soon, or his injuries would become irreversible. "Can you get her to move away from Apollo?" Beth asked, gripping her crowbar tighter. "Maybe." "But even if I can control Luna, we still need to get that tree off your calf, and from what I can see, his rear legs might be badly damaged. He's going to need immediate medical attention." Charlie Henderson stepped forward, his face grim. "I can help with the tree. I've got winches and pulleys in my truck. Insurance investigation equipment, but it'll work for this too." He looked directly at Beth, and she could see genuine remorse in his eyes. "I want you to know I never intended for things to go this far. The insurance company asked me to document your husband's daily activities to see if there was any evidence of pre-existing health conditions. But the more I watched, the more I realized they were just looking for an excuse not to pay. Then why didn't you tell me? Beth's voice cracked with 18 months of accumulated grief and betrayal. Because I'm a coward, Charlie replied simply. Because 20 years ago, when you were having problems with Robert, when you came to me for comfort, I should have told you to fight for your marriage instead of... He trailed off, but Beth understood. Their brief affair 2 decades ago had been a moment of weakness during a rough patch in her marriage, something she'd regretted and confessed to Robert within weeks. She'd assumed Charlie had forgotten about it entirely. I've been in love with you for 20 years, Beth, Charlie continued, and I let that cloud my judgment. I thought if the insurance company found grounds to deny the claim, if you lost the ranch, maybe you'd finally leave this place. Maybe you'd give me a chance to take care of you properly. The confession was like a slap across Beth's face. So you were willing to destroy my life for a chance to play hero? I was willing to do whatever it took to get you away from this place that's been slowly killing you for years. Charlie shot back, his own emotions finally breaking through. Look at yourself, Beth. When's the last time you ate a proper meal? When's the last time you went a day without drinking? You're diabetic, aren't you? Type 2, stress-induced, and you're managing it with wine and denial. Beth's silence was confirmation enough, and Charlie pressed his advantage. Robert's dead, Beth. He's been dead for 18 months, and you're so busy trying to keep his dream alive that you're dying right along with him. Emily sees it, I see it, probably half the county sees it. The only one who doesn't is you. Before Beth could respond, Apollo let out a sound that chilled everyone to the bone, not his usual cry for help, but a weak, gasping wheeze that suggested his lungs were being compressed beyond their capacity to function. Athena responded immediately, her bellows becoming more frantic as she tried desperately to reach her adopted son. Marcus had been slowly approaching Luna throughout their conversation, and now he was close enough to touch her massive coils. Everyone needs to stop talking and start working together, he said firmly. This calf is going into respiratory distress. We have maybe 10 minutes before his condition becomes irreversible. The urgency in his voice cut through all their personal drama like a scalpel. Beth looked at Apollo, whose trusting eyes were beginning to show the glassy look that she recognized from her nursing days, the look of someone whose body was starting to shut down. She made a decision that went against every instinct for self-preservation she'd ever had. Marcus, get your snake away from my calf. Charlie, get your equipment. I don't care about insurance investigations or old affairs or any of the rest of it. We're going to save Apollo, and we're going to do it now. As if summoned by her words, another vehicle approached through the morning mist. Dr. Rachel Torres' white veterinary van, emergency lights flashing. The 38-year-old veterinarian who'd been caring for Rolling Hills Ranch animals for over a decade climbed out with her medical bag, took one look at the scene, and immediately began barking orders with the authority of someone accustomed to life-and-death emergencies. "Someone tell me quickly what we're dealing with," she called out, already moving toward Apollo with the quick, efficient movements that had made her one of the most respected large animal vets in East Texas. 6-month-old Brahman bull calf trapped under approximately 3 tons of mesquite for at least 4 hours, Beth replied, slipping automatically into the clinical language she'd learned as a nurse. Respiratory distress, possible internal injuries, rear legs pinned and possibly fractured. Dr. Torres knelt beside Apollo, her hands moving expertly over his exposed body. Pulse is rapid but strong. Pupil response is good, but you're right about the respiratory distress. We need to get this weight off him immediately, or he's going to suffocate. She looked up at the assembled group, her dark eyes taking in Charlie's equipment, Marcus's proximity to the python, and Beth's white-knuckled grip on the crowbar. I don't know what kind of drama you people have been working through out here, but right now I need all of you to focus on one thing: keeping this animal alive. Charlie, get your winch system set up. Marcus, I don't care what your legal status is. I need your veterinary expertise. Beth, I need you to help me stabilize Apollo while these two work on moving the tree. As the team began to work together, Beth found herself thinking about Robert's final words to her in the hospital. Take care of our family, Beth. All of them. They're going to need you more than you know. At the time, she'd thought he was talking about Emily and the cattle. Now, watching a disgraced veterinarian, a conflicted insurance investigator, and a devoted animal doctor working together to save Apollo, she began to understand that family might be more complicated and more beautiful than she'd ever imagined. What followed was the most intense hour of Beth's life, a desperate ballet of human determination against the indifferent forces of nature and time. Dr. Torres worked with the focused intensity that had made her legendary among East Texas ranchers, her hands moving over Apollo's body with surgical precision while she barked orders to the unlikely team that had assembled around the fallen tree. Marcus had successfully coaxed Luna away from the immediate danger zone, using a combination of gentle commands and what appeared to be genuine affection for the massive python. "She's not aggressive," he explained to Beth as the snake coiled safely in a sunny spot 20 yards away. "Reticulated pythons are actually quite docile when they're not hunting or threatened." Luna here has been in captivity for 8 years. She was rescued from illegal traders when she was just a juvenile. Charlie had transformed from insurance investigator to mechanical engineer, using his surveying equipment in ways it was never designed for. He'd fashioned a complex pulley system anchored to his truck, with the winch cable running under the fallen mesquite at precisely the angle Dr. Torres had calculated would provide maximum lift with minimum risk of shifting the tree's weight onto Apollo's already compressed chest. "On my count," Dr. Torres called out, her stethoscope pressed against Apollo's ribs. "His oxygen saturation is dropping fast. We get one chance at this. If the tree shifts wrong, it could crush his chest cavity completely." Beth positioned herself at Apollo's head, her hands gentle on his muzzle, whispering the same soothing words she'd used when he was a newborn calf fighting for his first breaths. "That's my boy. That's my brave boy. Just hold on a little longer. Mama's here, and we're going to get you free." Athena had somehow managed to wedge herself even closer, her massive head now touching Apollo's neck, her warm breath providing comfort that no human intervention could match. The sight of the adoptive mother refusing to abandon her son gave Beth strength she didn't know she possessed. 3, 2, 1, lift! Charlie engaged the winch, and the cable went taut with a musical twang that seemed to vibrate through the morning air. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. 3 tons of waterlogged mesquite resisting their efforts with the stubbornness of the grave. Then, impossibly, the tree began to rise. "That's it!" Marcus shouted, throwing his weight against a secondary lever Charlie had positioned. "I can see daylight under the trunk." Dr. Torres was already in motion, her hands working to assess Apollo's crushed legs as precious inches of clearance opened above them. "Compound fracture of the right rear leg, but the bone hasn't severed any major arteries. Left leg looks intact, but severe soft tissue damage. Beth, I need you to help me slide him out as soon as we have enough clearance." The tree rose another inch, then 2. Apollo's breathing immediately improved as the crushing weight lifted from his chest, and his weak cries became stronger, more urgent. But they weren't cries of pain anymore. They were calls of recognition, the sound a child makes when they see their parent coming to rescue them from a nightmare. "Now," Dr. Torres commanded, "before the cable snaps." Beth and the veterinarian worked in perfect synchronization, sliding Apollo's body out from under the tree just as Charlie's makeshift pulley system reached its breaking point. The cable released with a sharp crack, and the mesquite crashed back to Earth with enough force to shake the ground, but Apollo was free. Free, but not safe. Doctor. Torres's initial examination revealed the full extent of the calf's injuries, and her face grew increasingly grave as she worked. Severe crush injuries to both rear legs, possible internal bleeding, and his body temperature is dangerously low from shock and exposure. I can stabilize him here, but he needs surgical intervention that I can't provide in a field setting. Texas A&M has the best veterinary hospital in the state, Marcus said quietly. It's a 4-hour drive, but they have the equipment and expertise to save him. 4 hours he doesn't have, Dr. Torres replied, injecting Apollo with what Beth recognized as a powerful painkiller. His blood pressure is dropping, and I'm seeing signs of kidney function compromise. Even if we could get him there, the surgery alone would cost... She trailed off, clearly reluctant to put a price on hope. How much? Beth asked, though she already suspected the answer would be devastating. Emergency orthopedic surgery on a large animal, intensive care, rehabilitation, you're looking at $15,000 to $20,000 minimum, and that's assuming he survives the trip. Beth felt the last of her financial security crumble. The ranch was barely breaking even. Emily had stolen and gambled away what little savings remained, and the insurance money that should have provided a buffer was tied up in legal battles that could drag on for years. She didn't have $15,000, she barely had $1,500. But as she looked down at Apollo, who was nuzzling her hand with the same trust he'd shown as a days-old orphan, Beth realized that the money didn't matter. Nothing mattered except giving this innocent creature every possible chance at life. "Do it," she said simply. "Whatever it costs, however long it takes, we're going to save him. Doctor." Torres nodded grimly and began preparing Apollo for transport, while Charlie started breaking down his equipment with the efficiency of a man who understood that some things were more important than professional obligations. But it was Marcus who provided the solution none of them had expected. "I still have surgical privileges at the A&M Veterinary Hospital," he said quietly. "My license was suspended, not revoked. And the head of their orthopedic department, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, was my residency supervisor 15 years ago. She's been trying to get me to come back to legitimate practice for months." Hope flickered in Beth's chest like a candle flame in a hurricane. "You mean you could perform the surgery yourself?" "Not officially. But I could assist, guide the procedure, make sure Apollo gets the specialized care he needs. And Dr. Walsh has a way of making sure that animals in desperate need don't get turned away for financial reasons." The offer was more than Beth had dared hope for, but she could see the cost it would exact from Marcus. Returning to a veterinary hospital, working around families with sick animals, risking the emotional triggers that had destroyed him 3 years ago, it was asking him to walk back into his own private hell. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why would you do this for us?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on Apollo's trusting face. "Because David Chen would have been the same age as Apollo is now, in animal years. And because some mistakes can't be undone, but maybe they can be balanced by doing something right." As Dr. Torres finished preparing Apollo for the journey, using her mobile veterinary unit as a makeshift ambulance, Beth realized that the morning had fundamentally changed all of them. Charlie had abandoned his insurance investigation, choosing to use his equipment and expertise to save rather than condemn. Marcus had found a path back toward redemption that didn't require him to forget his past, but rather to transform it into something meaningful. And Beth herself had discovered that love, real unconditional love, wasn't about protecting what you had, but about being willing to risk everything for what mattered most. The convoy that left Rolling Hills Ranch at 8:30 that morning was unlike anything the quiet county roads had ever seen. Dr. Torres led in her veterinary van, with Apollo stabilized in the back and Beth riding alongside to monitor his vital signs. Charlie followed in his truck, having volunteered to handle the logistics and paperwork that would be required at the hospital. And Marcus brought up the rear in his battered sedan, with Luna safely secured in her damaged but functional transport container, determined to see this rescue through to the end regardless of the personal cost. As they pulled away from the ranch, Beth caught sight of Athena standing at the pasture fence, her massive head raised as she watched her adopted son disappear down the road. The cows' bellowing calls followed them for nearly a mile, a mother's lament that seemed to echo across the rolling hills of East Texas like a prayer. Beth pressed her hand against Apollo's neck, feeling the steady rhythm of his pulse beneath her palm, and made a promise that she intended to keep no matter what obstacles lay ahead. "I'm going to bring you home, baby. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, I'm going to bring you home to your mama." Behind them, the fallen mesquite tree lay across the pasture like a scar on the landscape, but Beth no longer saw it as a symbol of destruction. Instead, it had become proof that even the strongest things could fall, and that when they did, what mattered most was who chose to stand beside you in the wreckage and help you build something new. The veterinary hospital at Texas A&M University loomed before them like a temple to modern medicine, all glass and steel and the promise of miracles that Beth wasn't sure she had the right to expect. Apollo had survived the 4-hour journey, but just barely. His vital signs had fluctuated wildly during the drive, and twice Dr. Torres had been forced to pull over to administer emergency medications that kept his damaged kidneys from shutting down completely. Dr. Jennifer Walsh met them at the emergency entrance with a team of veterinary students and residents, her silver hair pulled back in a surgical cap that she'd clearly thrown on in haste. At 55, she carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who'd spent 3 decades saving animals that everyone else had given up on. And when she saw Marcus climbing out of his sedan behind the convoy, her face showed a complex mixture of emotions. "Marcus Webb," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "I wondered when you'd finally work up the courage to come back." "Hello, Jennifer." Marcus couldn't quite meet her eyes. "I'm not here for me. I'm here for them." He gestured toward the veterinary van where Apollo lay fighting for his life. 6-month-old Brahman bull, crush injuries from a fallen tree, complications from a reticulated python encounter. He needs the kind of surgery I can't perform anymore. Dr. Walsh's professional mask never wavered, but Beth caught the slight softening around her eyes as she looked through the van's windows at Apollo. "Bring him in. We'll do everything we can." The next 6 hours passed in a blur of medical terminology, consent forms, and the peculiar hell that comes from being forced to wait while someone you love fights for their life behind doors you're not allowed to pass. Beth found herself in the hospital's family waiting room, a space designed to provide comfort during life's most uncomfortable moments, surrounded by other people whose animals were clinging to existence in the surgical suites below. Charlie had surprised her by staying, using his insurance expertise to help navigate the hospital's financial aid programs and payment plans. "You don't have to do this," Beth had told him during hour 3 of their vigil. "This isn't your responsibility." "Maybe not," Charlie replied, his voice rough with exhaustion. "But 20 years ago, I made a choice to love you from a distance rather than fight for what we might have had together. I'm not making that mistake again. I'm not walking away when you need help, even if it's help you don't want from me." Marcus had disappeared into the surgical suite immediately upon their arrival, and Beth hadn't seen him since. Dr. Torres had provided updates every hour. The surgery was proceeding, Apollo was stable, the orthopedic repairs were more complex than initially expected, but progressing well. But as the afternoon stretched into evening, Beth began to suspect that something was going wrong. The truth came at 6:47 p.m. when Dr. Walsh emerged from the surgical suite with the exhausted look of someone who'd been fighting a losing battle. She found Beth in the waiting room and sat down beside her with the careful movements of someone delivering devastating news. "We've repaired the fractures," Dr. Walsh said without preamble. "Dr. Webb's surgical skills haven't deteriorated at all. If anything, he's become even more precise than he was before his troubles began. The orthopedic work is textbook perfect." Beth felt her heart sink at the word "but" that she could hear coming. "What's wrong?" "Apollo's kidneys are failing." "The crush injuries caused more internal damage than we initially realized, and his body has been fighting shock and dehydration for too long. We've got him on dialysis, but at his age and size—" Dr. Walsh trailed off, but the implication was clear. "How long?" Beth asked, surprised by how steady her own voice sounded. "Hours, maybe less." "I'm sorry, Beth. Sometimes even perfect surgery isn't enough to overcome the damage that's already been done." The world seemed to tilt sideways around Beth as she processed this information. After everything they'd been through, the rescue, the journey, the surgery that had cost nearly $18,000 she didn't have, Apollo was still going to die. All their efforts, all their hope, all the promises she'd made to Athena and to herself were going to amount to nothing. "Can I see him?" she asked, though the words felt like they were coming from someone else's mouth. Dr. Walsh nodded. "He's sedated, but conscious, Doctor. Webb is with him now. He's refused to leave the recovery suite since the surgery ended." Beth found Marcus sitting beside Apollo's recovery stall, his hand resting gently on the calf's neck. The young bull looked impossibly small, surrounded by all the medical equipment keeping him alive, but his eyes were open and alert when Beth approached. He tried to lift his head when he saw her, and the effort broke her heart completely. "Hey, baby," she whispered, kneeling beside the stall. "I'm here. I'm so sorry I let this happen to you." Marcus looked up at her with red-rimmed eyes. "It's not your fault. The kidney damage was probably inevitable from the moment that tree fell. Sometimes medicine just isn't enough." "Is he in pain?" "No. We've got him on the best pain management protocol in veterinary medicine. He's comfortable, and he knows you're here." "That's what matters now." Beth reached through the stall bars to stroke Apollo's forehead, the same gesture she'd been making since he was a day-old orphan. "Robert always said you were special," she told the dying calf. "He said you were going to save someone someday. I guess I just thought—" She couldn't finish the sentence. That's when Apollo did something that would haunt Beth for the rest of her life. Despite his injuries, despite the medical equipment and the sedation, he somehow managed to lift his head enough to nuzzle her hand. It was the same gesture he'd made as a baby when she'd bottle-fed him, the same trust and affection that had defined their relationship from the very beginning. And in that moment, Beth understood what Robert had meant. Apollo hadn't been meant to save someone else. He'd been meant to save her. His presence had given her purpose during the darkest period of her life, had provided her with something to love unconditionally when everything else seemed to be falling apart. Even now, facing his own death with the dignity that seemed to come naturally to animals, he was still trying to comfort her. "I love you too, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I love you so much." Dr. Walsh appeared in the doorway of the recovery suite, her face grave. "Beth, there's something else. The financial aid program can cover about 60% of the surgical costs, but you're still looking at a substantial bill for a procedure that ultimately—" She didn't finish, but Beth understood. "How much?" $7,000. I know it's a lot, especially given the outcome." $7,000 that Beth didn't have for a surgery that had failed to save the animal she loved like a son. The irony was so bitter that Beth almost laughed. She'd lost her husband, her daughter had betrayed her, her neighbor had investigated her, and now she was going to lose Apollo anyway while going bankrupt in the process. "There is one option," Dr. Walsh continued carefully. "If you surrender ownership of Apollo to the university, we can classify this as a research case. The costs would be covered, and we'd continue to provide care for as long as necessary." The offer was generous, but it felt like being asked to abandon Apollo when he needed her most. Beth looked down at the calf whose trust had never wavered, even in his darkest hour, and knew there was only one answer she could live with. "No," she said simply. "He's my family. You don't abandon family no matter how much it costs." Marcus looked up at her with something that might have been admiration. "Even if it means losing everything?" "I already lost everything," Beth replied. "Everything except him." "And if I can't save him, at least I can make sure he knows he was loved until the very end." As the sun set over College Station, Beth Harrison sat beside a dying bull calf in a veterinary hospital, holding his head in her lap and whispering the same lullabies she'd once sung to Emily when her daughter was small. Outside, Charlie Henderson worked his phone, calling in every favor he'd accumulated in 20 years of insurance work. And in the surgical suite, Dr. Marcus Webb stared at Apollo's medical charts, searching for some miracle that his years of training might have overlooked. None of them knew that Apollo's story was far from over. At 11:47 p.m., when the hospital corridors had grown quiet and most of the staff had gone home, Apollo's heart stopped. The flatline alarm shrieked through the recovery suite like a banshee's wail, bringing Dr. Walsh and the overnight emergency team running. Beth watched in numb horror as they surrounded Apollo's still form, hands moving with practiced efficiency to begin resuscitation efforts. But after 18 minutes of chest compressions and emergency drugs, Dr. Walsh finally stepped back and reached for the machine that would silence the alarm forever. "Wait," Marcus said quietly from the corner where he'd been standing in stunned silence. "Just wait another minute. Marcus, he's gone. I know this is hard, but please." The word came out broken, desperate. David Chen was pronounced dead at 11:47 p.m. 3 years ago. Just give me one more minute before we let another child die at that time. Doctor. Walsh's hand froze over the monitor controls, and in the sudden quiet that followed, something extraordinary happened. Apollo's chest rose in a shallow, barely perceptible breath. Then another. The heart monitor flickered, showing the faintest trace of electrical activity. "That's impossible," one of the residents whispered. But Dr. Walsh was already moving, her hands flying over Apollo's body as she checked for signs of life that medical science said shouldn't exist. Pulse is thready but present. Pupil response is sluggish but there. Get me epinephrine and start a dopamine drip now. The emergency team sprang back into action with renewed urgency, but Beth could see the confusion in their faces. Animals didn't come back from clinical death, especially not animals whose kidneys had failed and whose bodies had endured the trauma Apollo had suffered. Over the next hour, Apollo's condition stabilized in ways that defied every medical textbook in the veterinary hospital library. Yet his kidney function began to improve, slowly but measurably. His heart rhythm strengthened. The swelling in his injured legs decreased. Dr. Walsh ran test after test, trying to find some scientific explanation for what was happening, but the results only deepened the mystery. "I've been practicing veterinary medicine for 31 years, she told Beth at 3 a.m., her voice filled with wonder and bewilderment. "I've seen animals recover from things that should have killed them, but I've never seen anything like this. It's as if his body just decided to heal itself." Marcus had remained by Apollo's side throughout the night, monitoring every change with the intensity of a man seeking redemption in the beat of a calf's heart. "Maybe some things can't be explained by medical science," he said quietly. Maybe some recoveries happen because they need to happen. But the true miracle wasn't Apollo's inexplicable recovery. It was what Beth discovered when she stepped outside at dawn to call Athena's owner, Charlie, with the update. Her phone showed 17 missed calls from Emily, and when she finally listened to the voicemails, her daughter's voice told a story that would change everything. "Mom, it's me. It's 2 a.m. and I know you're at the hospital with Apollo, but I need you to know something. I've been at the police station for the past 6 hours, turning myself in for the forgery and fraud charges, but that's not why I'm calling." Emily's voice was different, steadier, more mature than Beth had heard it in years. "I called Dad's old partner at the construction company, the one who did the insurance paperwork when Dad bought that life insurance policy. Mom, the insurance company lied to you." Dad disclosed everything: his high blood pressure, his cholesterol, even the chest pains he'd been having for months before he died. Beth's legs gave out and she found herself sitting on the hospital steps as Emily's words continued to pour from her phone. "The insurance investigator they hired, Charlie Henderson, he wasn't looking for reasons to deny your claim. He was documenting the insurance company's bad faith. He's been building a case against them for 18 months, Mom. He's been trying to help you." The next voicemail revealed even more stunning truths. "I found copies of all his reports in Dad's old files. Charlie's been in love with you for 20 years, and he's been fighting to get you the money Dad wanted you to have. The insurance company fired him 2 weeks ago when they realized he was working against them, not for them." Emily's voice broke on the final message. "Mom, I sold the land to pay my gambling debts, but I also did it because I thought you'd be better off without the ranch. I thought you were dying there, slowly, and I was too much of a coward to help you heal. But watching you fight for Apollo, seeing how much love you still have to give, I realize I was wrong about everything. I'm going to make this right, somehow. I promise." When Beth stumbled back into the hospital, she found Charlie sitting in the waiting room with his head in his hands. He looked up when he heard her footsteps, and she could see the weight of deception and love warring in his expression. "How long have you known?" she asked simply. "Known what?" "That Emily called you, that she told you I found out about the insurance investigation." Charlie's shoulders sagged in defeat. "Since about an hour ago. She tracked down my number and called to confess everything: her gambling, the land sale, and what she'd figured out about my reports." He stood up slowly, like a man preparing for execution. "I never wanted you to find out this way, Beth. I wanted to tell you myself when the legal case was settled and I could hand you a check for the full 50,000 plus damages. Why didn't you tell me from the beginning? Because I'm a selfish bastard who thought if I could be your hero, if I could save you from financial ruin, maybe you'd finally see me as something more than just your neighbor." Charlie's laugh was bitter and self-deprecating. "Instead, I ended up being just another man who lied to you because he thought he knew better than you did about your own life." Beth studied his face in the harsh fluorescent lighting of the hospital waiting room, seeing for the first time the toll that 18 months of deception had taken on him. "Are you in love with me, Charlie, or are you in love with the idea of rescuing me?" The question hung between them like a challenge, and Charlie was quiet for a long moment before he answered. "I don't know anymore. Maybe there's no difference. Maybe I've been telling myself it was love because that was easier than admitting I just wanted to feel needed by someone who mattered." Before Beth could respond, Dr. Walsh appeared in the waiting room doorway with an expression of barely controlled excitement. "Beth, you need to see this. Apollo is asking for you." They followed her back to the recovery suite, where an impossible sight awaited them. Apollo was sitting up in his stall, his head raised alertly, his eyes bright and focused. When he saw Beth, he let out a soft, lowing sound. Not the desperate cry of an animal in pain, but the welcoming call of a child greeting a beloved parent. His kidney function is at 80% of normal, doctor, Walsh said, her voice filled with professional wonder. His blood work is better than some healthy animals I see. The orthopedic repairs are healing at an accelerated rate. By every measure we can apply, this animal should be dead, but instead he's showing signs of a complete recovery. Marcus emerged from the shadows of the recovery suite, his face transformed by something that looked like peace for the first time since Beth had met him. I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about Robert telling you Apollo would save someone someday. Maybe he wasn't talking about the future. Maybe he was talking about right now. What do you mean? Apollo's recovery is going to be written up in veterinary journals. Dr. Walsh has already been contacted by researchers who want to study his case. But more than that, the story is going to get out. A woman who mortgaged her future to save a bull calf, a disgraced veterinarian who found his way back to healing, an insurance investigator who chose truth over profit. It's the kind of story that reminds people why love matters more than money. As if summoned by Marcus's words, Beth's phone began to ring. The first call was from a local news station that had somehow heard about Apollo's miraculous recovery. The second was from a national morning show. The third was from a documentary filmmaker who specialized in stories about the bonds between humans and animals. Within hours, Rolling Hills Ranch would become famous. Within days, donations would pour in from across the country to cover Apollo's medical bills and help Beth rebuild her life. Within weeks, Emily would use the media attention to expose the insurance company's fraudulent practices, leading to a class action lawsuit that would result in Beth receiving not just the original $50,000, but nearly $200,000 in punitive damages. But standing in that recovery suite at dawn, watching Apollo nuzzle her hand with the same trust he'd shown as a newborn, Beth understood that the real miracle wasn't the money or the fame or even the medical impossibility of his recovery. The real miracle was that love, imperfect, complicated, sometimes misguided love, had somehow managed to save them all. 3 years after that storm-torn morning when Beth Harrison thought she'd lost everything, Rolling Hills Ranch had become something she never could have imagined, a place where broken things came to heal, where second chances bloomed like wildflowers after rain, and where the impossible happened often enough to feel almost routine. Beth stood on her front porch at dawn, coffee mug in hand, watching Apollo graze in the main pasture with the same gentle dignity that had defined him from birth, though now his massive frame carried the quiet authority of a bull who'd touched death and chosen to return. At nearly 4 years old, he weighed close to 1,800 pounds, his black and reddish-brown coat gleaming in the East Texas sunrise like burnished copper. The scars from his injuries had faded to thin white lines along his rear legs, barely visible unless you knew where to look. Beside him, Athena moved with the careful steps of a cow in her golden years, her muzzle now silver with age, but her protective instincts still sharp as the day she'd faced down an 18-foot python to save her adopted son. She'd never had biological calves of her own, but she'd become the unofficial grandmother to every animal on the ranch, including the 17 rescued horses, 12 abandoned cattle, 3 pot-bellied pigs, and 1 ancient donkey named Methuselah, who'd arrived just last month. The Rolling Hills Animal Sanctuary, as it was now officially known, sprawled across 450 acres, funded by a combination of insurance settlement money, documentary rights, corporate sponsorships, and the steady stream of donations that still arrived from around the world 3 years after Apollo's story had captured hearts on 6 continents. Beth had used the insurance company's punitive damages not to expand her own wealth, but to build something larger than herself. A place where animals who'd been discarded, abused, or abandoned could find peace in their final years. "Some mornings I still can't believe this is real," came a familiar voice from behind her. Beth turned to see Emily emerging from the ranch house, her 31-year-old daughter looking healthier and more content than she had since childhood. Emily had moved back to East Texas 2 years ago, using her legal expertise to help run the sanctuary's operations while building a small practice focused on animal welfare law. The gambling addiction that had nearly destroyed both their lives was 3 years in remission, managed through weekly therapy sessions and a support group she attended religiously in nearby Huntsville. "Mama's up early this morning," Emily observed, settling into the porch swing that Charlie had built last spring. Her 7-month-old daughter, Sarah Beth, named for both her grandmother and the great-grandmother she'd never meet, slept peacefully in her arms, tiny fingers clutched around a miniature stuffed bull that bore a striking resemblance to Apollo. "She's been fussy all night," Emily continued, her voice carrying the exhausted but content tone of new motherhood. "I think she's going through a growth spurt. Either that or she's already showing signs of the family stubbornness." Beth smiled, reaching over to stroke her granddaughter's soft cheek. Sarah Beth had been born on a snowy February morning, delivered by Dr. Rachel Torres in the ranch's guest bedroom, when a winter storm made the roads to the hospital impassable. The irony of a veterinarian delivering a human baby hadn't been lost on anyone, but Dr. Torres had handled the situation with the same calm competence that had made her legendary among the county's animal owners. "Any word from Marcus this morning?" Emily asked, adjusting the baby's blanket as the morning air carried a slight chill. "He texted around 5. The conference presentation went well, and 3 more veterinary schools want to add his recovery protocol to their curriculum." Beth's voice carried pride mixed with amazement. Hard to believe the man who thought his career was over is now teaching other doctors how to save animals everyone else has given up on. Dr. Marcus Webb had indeed found his way back to legitimate practice, though the path hadn't been straight or simple. His work with Apollo's miraculous recovery had attracted attention from veterinary researchers around the world, leading to a position at Texas A&M as a clinical instructor specializing in trauma cases that other doctors deemed hopeless. His methods, which combined traditional medical intervention with what he called holistic environmental therapy, had saved hundreds of animals over the past 3 years. But perhaps more importantly, Marcus had found a way to honor his son's memory and David Chen's death without being destroyed by the weight of his guilt. He'd established a scholarship fund for veterinary students who'd overcome addiction or personal trauma, and he spoke regularly at conferences about the intersection of grief, redemption, and healing. His marriage to Dr. Rachel Torres 18 months ago had surprised no one who'd watched them work together, their professional respect gradually deepening into a love built on shared purpose and mutual understanding of life's fragility. "And Charlie?" Emily asked, though she already knew the answer from the contentment in her mother's expression. "Still snoring in the guest bedroom," Beth replied with a laugh. "That man can sleep through anything except a cow in distress." Charlie Henderson had become a permanent fixture at Rolling Hills Ranch, though his role had evolved far beyond the insurance investigator who'd arrived 3 years ago with hidden agendas and complex motivations. He'd used his settlement from the insurance company, he'd successfully sued them for wrongful termination and professional defamation, to help fund the sanctuary's initial construction. His expertise in risk assessment and financial planning had proven invaluable in managing the ranch's growth from a personal rescue operation into a legitimate nonprofit organization. More personally, his relationship with Beth had developed into something neither of them had expected: a mature love built on honesty, shared purpose, and the hard-earned wisdom that came from surviving their individual mistakes. They'd married in a simple ceremony the previous October, with Apollo serving as an unlikely ring-bearer and half the county in attendance to celebrate a romance that had taken 20 years and nearly ended in betrayal before finding its proper foundation. "I still can't get over how different everything is," Emily mused, shifting Sarah Beth to her shoulder as the baby began to wake. 3 years ago, I thought this place was a prison that was slowly killing you. Now it feels like the center of the universe." Beth understood what her daughter meant. The ranch that had once felt isolated and overwhelming was now bustling with activity from dawn to dusk. Volunteers arrived daily to help with animal care, maintenance, and the educational programs that had become one of the sanctuary's most important functions. School groups toured the facilities weekly, learning about animal welfare, environmental stewardship, and the healing power of interspecies bonds. Veterans with PTSD worked with rescued horses in a therapy program that had garnered national attention for its effectiveness. The documentary about Apollo's story had won 3 Emmy Awards and spawned a children's book series that donated all its proceeds to animal rescue organizations. Beth had become an reluctant celebrity, appearing on television shows and speaking at conferences about animal welfare, though she always insisted that the real heroes were the animals themselves and the volunteers who made their care possible. "Do you ever regret it?" Emily asked quietly. "Giving up the quiet life you had before?" Beth considered the question seriously, watching Apollo lift his massive head to check on a group of rescued horses that were grazing at the far end of the pasture. "I regret the pain we all went through to get here," she said finally. "I regret the years we wasted being angry at each other. I regret that your father isn't here to see what we've built and to meet his granddaughter, but regret the sanctuary itself? Never." As if summoned by their conversation, Apollo began walking toward the house with the measured pace of a bull who knew he was beloved. When he reached the fence nearest the porch, he let out a soft, lowing sound that Beth had learned to interpret as his morning greeting. Sarah Beth stirred in Emily's arms, her tiny eyes opening to focus on the enormous animal with the same lack of fear that seemed to be genetic in their family. "I think she recognizes him," Emily said with wonder. "Look at how calm she is." Beth climbed down from the porch and approached the fence, reaching through the bars to scratch behind Apollo's ears in the same gesture she'd made when he was a calf fighting for his life. She should recognize him. He's been singing to her since she was in the womb. It was true. Throughout Emily's pregnancy, Apollo had shown an unusual interest in her changing condition, often positioning himself near wherever she was working and humming the low, rumbling sound that cows made when they were content. Dr. Torres had explained that cattle were remarkably sensitive to human emotions and physical changes, but Apollo's behavior had gone beyond normal bovine empathy. He'd seemed to understand that Emily was carrying something precious, something that would extend the family he'd been part of since birth. Now, as Sarah Beth reached her tiny hand toward Apollo's massive face, the bull lowered his head with infinite gentleness, allowing the baby's fingers to touch his muzzle. The sight of innocence meeting innocence across species lines brought tears to Beth's eyes, as it always did when she witnessed the simple magic that had become commonplace at Rolling Hills Ranch. "Mrs. Harrison," a young voice called from the direction of the main road, and Beth turned to see a teenager on a bicycle approaching the ranch entrance. She recognized him immediately, Tommy Chen, David's older brother, who'd been volunteering at the sanctuary every weekend for the past 6 months. Tommy parked his bike and approached the porch with the respectful manner that characterized all his interactions with the ranch's human and animal residents. At 17, he carried himself with a maturity that came from experiencing profound loss at a young age, but his work with the rescued animals had brought a lightness to his demeanor that hadn't been there when he'd first arrived. "Dr. Webb asked me to tell you that Luna laid another clutch of eggs last night," Tommy said, his voice carrying excitement. 23 eggs this time, and he thinks they're all fertile." Luna, the python, had become an unexpected success story at the sanctuary, serving as an educational ambassador while participating in a breeding program designed to support reticulated python conservation efforts in Southeast Asia. Her story, from illegal trafficking victim to respected member of a legitimate conservation effort, paralleled the human redemption narratives that had become central to Rolling Hills Ranch's mission. "That's wonderful news," Beth replied. "Dr. Webb must be thrilled." Tommy nodded enthusiastically, then grew more serious. "Mrs. Harrison, I wanted to ask you something. I've been accepted to Texas A&M's pre-veterinary program for next fall, and Dr. Webb said he'd sponsor my application to work in his trauma recovery clinic while I'm completing my undergraduate degree." The request wasn't unexpected. Several young people who'd volunteered at the sanctuary had gone on to pursue careers in veterinary medicine, animal welfare law, or conservation biology, but Tommy's situation was particularly meaningful given his connection to Marcus's past. "I know it might be weird having me work so closely with Dr. Webb given our family's history," Tommy continued. "But he's been like a mentor to me, and I think working with animals who've survived trauma might help me process what happened to David in a healthy way." Emily shifted Sarah Beth to get a better look at the young man who'd been such a consistent presence at the ranch. "Tommy, do you think David would approve of your decision?" The teenager considered the question carefully before answering. "I think David would want his death to mean something more than just tragedy. Working with Dr. Webb, learning to save animals that everyone else has given up on, it feels like a way to honor his memory while building something positive." Beth felt her heart swell with pride for this young man who'd found a way to transform his family's deepest grief into a commitment to healing. "Tommy, if Dr. Webb wants to sponsor you and Texas A&M accepts you into the program, Rolling Hills Ranch will provide whatever additional support you need, scholarships, housing assistance, whatever it takes." The joy that spread across Tommy's face was worth more than any award the sanctuary had ever received. "Thank you, Mrs. Harrison. I won't let you down." As Tommy rode away to begin his morning volunteer duties, Beth reflected on the intricate web of connections that had grown from that terrible morning when Apollo nearly died. Marcus had found redemption by saving animals, which had led to Tommy finding purpose in following the same path, which would likely lead to countless other animals being saved by a veterinarian who understood that healing was about more than just medical intervention. "It's like ripples in a pond," Emily observed, echoing her mother's thoughts. "One moment of choosing love over fear, and the circles just keep expanding outward." Sarah Beth had dozed off again, lulled by the morning warmth and the peaceful sounds of the sanctuary coming to life around them. In the distance, Charlie's voice could be heard as he supervised the morning feeding routine with a group of new volunteers. Dr. Torres's veterinary van was pulling up the main drive for her weekly health checks on the newest rescues. And Apollo remained at the fence, a gentle giant whose presence seemed to anchor all the activity around him in something timeless and profound. "You know what Robert would say if he could see all this?" Beth asked, settling back into her porch chair to watch another day unfold at the sanctuary that had grown from their shared dream. "What?" Beth smiled, remembering her late husband's voice with perfect clarity. "He'd say that some stories don't end. They just keep beginning over and over again, every time someone chooses to believe that love is stronger than loss." As if in agreement, Apollo lifted his magnificent head toward the rising sun and let out a call that seemed to embrace everything within sight. The rescued animals finding peace in their final years, the humans finding purpose in caring for them, the baby who would grow up understanding that family could include creatures with 4 legs and gentle hearts, and the endless possibility that existed wherever broken things were allowed to heal. In the golden light of that East Texas morning, Rolling Hills Ranch felt less like a destination than a beginning, proof that sometimes the most beautiful chapters of our lives start with the words, "and then everything changed." Dear friends, as we close Beth's remarkable journey from devastating loss to unexpected joy, I want to speak directly to those of you who, like Beth at 52, may feel that your best chapters are behind you. Perhaps you've lost a spouse, watched children move away, or wondered if the dreams you once held still matter. Beth's story reminds us that sometimes our greatest purpose reveals itself not in our youth, but in our wisdom years, when we've learned that love isn't about what we can get, but what we're willing to give. At 55, 60, or 65, you possess something invaluable: the hard-earned knowledge that relationships matter more than possessions, that chosen family can be as precious as blood family, and that it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be. Beth didn't plan to become a sanctuary founder or a national inspiration. She simply chose to love unconditionally when everything seemed lost. Your Apollo might not be a bull calf. It might be a grandchild who needs your guidance, a community that needs your experience, or a cause that needs your passion. The empty nest doesn't have to mean an empty heart. Your story of resilience, wisdom, and the beautiful complications of mature love is just beginning. What second chances are waiting in your own pasture? What dream have you set aside that might be worth revisiting at this stage of your life? Have you ever experienced a moment when choosing to help someone else unexpectedly healed your own heart? Please share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.